South Africa and Nigeria, the two largest economies in Africa, have vowed to strengthen their strategic partnership to drive the continent's transformation. During the 11th session of the Binational Commission in Cape Town, South Africa, Presidents Cyril Ramaphosa and Bola Tinubu highlighted key areas of collaboration, from economic integration and youth development to tackling illegal mining and global governance reforms. Our State House correspondent Adeswa Omora has been tracking the meeting and now reports.
President Bola Tinubu arrives Cape Town after a 3-day state visit to France. He is greeted by government officials of South Africa and Nigeria's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs.
Very well. How are you, my brother?
I'm okay.
At the Tyne Heights, he is welcomed by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, and then to the business of the day, the start of the 11th Nigeria-South Africa Binational Commission. This year's session carries historic weight as the two countries mark 30 years of diplomatic ties first established in February 1994.
We affirm once again our close bonds of friendship as well as solidarity, a friendship that has existed between our two countries for a very long time.
Nigerians from all walks of life are mobilized in unison. I'm very happy to share with you the joy of freedom and democracy.
In their opening remarks, Presidents Ramaphosa and Tinubu stressed the importance of deepening economic cooperation and addressing Africa's shared challenges. Ramaphosa highlighted measures to enhance bilateral trade, including simplified visa processes for Nigerian business people.
We look forward to seeing more Nigerian companies investing in South Africa. In fact, we want to see Nigerian products on the shelves of South African shops. Our efforts to create a favorable environment include our simplified visa process for Nigerian business people to travel to South Africa. Qualifying Nigerian business people can be granted a 5-year multiple entry visa. In addition, tourists from Nigeria are now able to apply for a visa without even submitting a passport.
In response, President Tinubu called for both nations to act as leaders in Africa's transformation. He stresses the importance of overcoming obstacles in their bilateral relations, describing them as irritants that hindered progress. Tinubu also reiterated Nigeria's desire to join South Africa in the G20 and propose joint action against illegal mining.
We can identify the gaps and challenges, including persistent irritation in relations, and deal with them appropriately. To me, this is the real essence of BNC. Together, we can act as engines of economic integration, development in our perspective, sub-regions, as well as on the continent.
Both leaders emphasized the importance of youth in Africa's future. Ramaphosa linked youth development to South Africa's G20 agenda, while Tinubu highlights Nigeria's inclusive governance approach.
These young people represent the future. They are the demography that must be tended, invested in, and have their skill and potential harvested for development and the goals of the continent.
The session also reflected on historical ties.
As we mark 30 years since the establishment of diplomatic relations between Nigeria and South Africa, we see a bright future for our relationship. Our strong bonds of friendship provide a firm foundation for our two countries for more meaningful economic cooperation.
I have accorded due to recognition to our shared history of collaboration and cooperation. We must ensure that the spirit of the collaboration and cooperation between our two leading countries in Africa will intensify and deepen under our leadership of our respective nations.
As the summit concluded, both leaders urged the implementation of over 30 memoranda of understanding signed over the past 25 years, calling for concrete action to transform agreements into tangible results.
The BNC has really come of age, but I must, however, sound a note of caution here. Let us not count on successes by number of MOUs and agreements signed. They will be mere papers until we implement them in spirit and in letter.
Adesua Omorwan, Arise News.
Well, meanwhile, Nigeria and South Africa have agreed to finalize a 5-year-old memorandum of understanding on an early warning mechanism to monitor and prevent violence and criminal acts involving nationals from both countries. The MOU, aimed at addressing past attacks on Nigerians in South Africa, will be signed by March 2025. At the Bi-National Commission in Cape Town, both leaders, when commenting on this, said they are committed to addressing the mutual challenges, including food security, digital connectivity, and artificial intelligence. On the international stage, they agreed to coordinate positions for upcoming African Union elections and reaffirm support for peace efforts across the continent, including in Sudan and Western Sahara.
Well, for more on this, let's bring in a RISE analyst, Dr. Constance Ikoku. Good morning, Dr. Constance.
Good morning, Yolanda.
So what do you think? What are your general comments about this meeting that has just happened?
Well, the first thing to note is that when you listen to the online chatter about the fraught relations between Nigerians and South Africa in general, it is almost impossible to believe that these two countries have formal government relations that are cordial, and actually have a binational commission that has existed since 1999. And so that's why these two leaders are meeting, President Bola Tinubu and President Cyril Ramaphosa in South Africa. The Binational Commission is meant to facilitate dialogue, decision-making, and cooperation between countries in areas of mutual interest. In this case, sometimes it has to do with energy, security, trade, and other things, including healthcare and cultural exchange. In this particular meeting, both presidents highlighted the importance of working together. President Ramaphosa invited President Bola Tinubu to South Africa, and we know that South Africans have a lot of presence in Nigeria. Both countries have solid trade relations. For instance, you have MTN in Nigeria, we have MultiChoice, you have Sabmiller Brewery, Standard Chartered Bank, Protea Hotels, Game, and a couple of others. On the other hand, Nigerians, there are many of them in South Africa that work as professionals, and others that also operate small businesses. Essentially, President Ramaphosa was saying that South Africa and Nigeria have to work more together. He wants them to explore more areas in manufacturing, even in aviation, in ICT, in digital technology. So these countries, I think, are going to be working more together in the near future. They've signed, MOUs, and that's what we're going to see happening going forward.
And Dr. Constance, Nigeria and South Africa have been friends, say on the surface, over the years, in governance, in business, and even artistic collaborations. But beneath all that, there seems to be this simmering hostility, so that, whenever there are violent outbreaks in South Africa, Nigerians get targeted. What went wrong?
I mean, that's a very important point. I think also that social media contributes to all of this. And then the history of South Africa, where, blacks were, discriminated against, a lot of them without jobs in their own country, even at the end of apartheid. So there's all of this going on, and then they see other nationals who may be more intellectually or that have more education than them coming into their countries to get jobs. You have that. But both countries have agreed that this is something important they have to work together on. There's also other issues that were brought up by President Ramaphosa. For instance, he talked about multilateralism. He talked about African Union Agenda 2063, Nigeria's chairmanship of ECOWAS, reforming the United Nations Permanent Council. He also talked about South Africa's chairmanship or hosting of the G20. South Africa is supposed to host the G20 next. And President Ramaphosa talked about leadership for the African continent. He essentially was saying to his country and Nigeria to step up. Without leadership on the continent, you'll not be able to achieve all of this. For instance, when he talked about the G20 summit that is holding in South Africa next, they're taking over from Brazil, he said that the agenda of Africa and the global side will be put on that summit. And it is necessary for Africa to have a voice, to be on that table when decisions are being made. In most cases, they are completely absent and decisions concerning them are being made without their input. On the AU Agenda 2063, the AU is undergoing some leadership changes. That agenda talks about a blueprint and a plan for economic development, for growth on the continent. If countries do not work together, they do not cooperate, and they do nothing, this will not be achieved. On the United Nations Permanent Council seat, it talked about Africa having a voice. Again, if Africans are not united to push for what is important to them and what is necessary for the advancement of the continent, then that will not happen. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is another area that is said is key. Africans, again, have to work together. Essentially, President Ramaphosa and President Tinubu have said, that South Africa and Nigeria need to provide the leadership and to play the roles that are necessary for the advancement of the continent.
Definitely. I think it's very important that Nigeria and South Africa, like you say, play those roles for the advancement of the continent. And, today we focused a lot on Nigeria and South Africa's relationship because we do see one thing on social media, but our history together tells us something else. Nigeria was the country that chaired the UN Special Committee against apartheid, and Nigeria did play a huge role in turning the tide in terms of protecting South African students, educating them, and also, giving safe haven to South African leaders such as Thabo Mbeki, who live just in VI. But, going on the UN, because Nigeria and South Africa are trying to align on certain initiatives. But if we focus on the UN that I had just mentioned, Nigeria wants membership of G20, but both Nigeria and South Africa want to be that African nation that has a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Do you think that this is something that will affect the relationship, or what country do you think is most likely to get that permanent seat on the UN Security Council?
I think during this binational commission, what came up topmost is that cooperation is needed. As long as the countries are discussing and talking about the relevant issues that pertain to the African continent and how to move forward as a united bloc, then that will happen. So the issue of rivalry concerning a permanent seat of United Nations does not come up. It is something that can be discussed within the continent, whether it's South Africa, whether it's Nigeria. There's also other countries. There's Egypt, there's Kenya. So as long as they are talking together and the focus is the advancement of the African peoples, working together for the benefit of the African people, that's what is going to happen when it comes to making that decision on who flies the flag or who sits on that permanent council.
Now for a review of what's making the headlines, Dr. Constance.
All right, we'll go on to the review of the papers this morning. To join us to look at the papers, we have Emmanuel Azikian. He is a columnist with Vanguard newspapers. Hello there and welcome to the program. We'll begin with This Day newspaper. In This Day, this morning, we have Senate passes 2025-2027 MTEF FCP probes NNPCL over 11.54 trillion naira subsidy funds and unremitted taxes. The medium-term expenditure framework MTEF and fiscal strategy paper FSP have been passed. This provides a comprehensive plan for government spending, outlining revenue projections, expenditure, and fiscal strategies. But also, the Senate asked its committees on finance and petroleum and gas to investigate allegations that the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited withheld about 8.48 trillion in petroleum subsidies and $2 billion in unpaid taxes. Emmanuel, that's a staggering amount, but it's not new. The NNPCL has often been seen as opaque and less than transparent in its dealings. So these allegations cannot be swept under the carpet.
Certainly, the allegations cannot be swept because that's a humongous amount of money. And but I must first of all come to the passage of the MTF, and which is a welcome development. But I'm worried by the delay in the passage of that fiscal framework, because this should have been passed as early as August to prepare the framework for the budget to be presented to the National Assembly. I'm worried by that delay because you will now see that the budget, we just have less than 2 weeks or 3 weeks to about 3 weeks to the end of the year for the Senate to consider a budget for the country, and which is quite late under the fiscal under the law. This budget should have been presented as early as October to allow time for the National Assembly to detail and to scrutinize it. Now, if you look at the MTF, 1,400 naira was fixed as the rate to the dollar for the year, for the 3 years ahead. But you will consider that you will also realize that in this year's budget, put a benchmark of put the dollar at about 800 naira, and it didn't meet that mark. So one is worried. The framework that has been put forward by the administration and by the that has been put by the National Assembly, whether it is going to be appropriate. Mark, I also add that please, this is about the most important document that the National Assembly has to present to the country. This is about the most important law that the country, the National Assembly has to pass in the year. The budget is the framework under which expenditure is made both by the federal government and by the federal government. But it is worrisome that there is a laxity on the part of the administration in bringing this to pass. One expected that this budget should have been well presented, well ahead. In other jurisdictions, like in the United States, it takes a year for the budget to be scrutinized, to be considered, because people have to come to public hearings. But with what we are having now, I'm so much afraid that we will not have a detailed consideration of the budget.
Charles, we've been made to note that the Office of the Auditor General has received complete documents to verify the fuel subsidy claims by NNPCL against the government. The expectation is that this will be thoroughly carried to a logical conclusion. No, in the interest of Nigerians, they need to know.
Actually, I'm just wondering what must have happened to over 8-point-something trillion naira. The allegation is that they withheld those funds from government. Okay, fine, they did withhold the funds. So let's assume that the funds have been withheld and are somewhere and actually not looted, so to say. So yeah, I mean, of course, let them investigate. If the funds are somewhere, Nigerians will be better off for it. If not, then heads have to roll.
All right, let's look at Daily Sun. Tax reforms bill, FG bows to pressure, approves modification, laments misinformation about bill, Senate vows to consult widely. This bill is still top story in most of the papers, given the wide range and implications when it's passed. Both chambers are promising to hold wide consultations, and that's what should happen, Emmanuel, isn't it?
Yes, wide consultations. Given the far-reaching effects of these tax reforms, there is no doubt that a large section of the polity is agitated But first of all, one must give kudos to the administration for coming up with this initiative. And I must tell you that I'm very much impressed with what the head of the Reform Committee, that's Oyedele, the explanations he's been giving to these considerations. And concerning the consultations and the awareness, one expects, and one is urging the administration and the committee to make more public awareness of this of the reforms that are being proposed, because you hear some of those who are opposed to it. One of the prominent lawmakers, I call out Senator Ndume, who said that he has not read the bill, but he's opposed to it. You see, some people, they've not read the bill. It's just primordial sentiments that this bill is going to be disadvantageous to my section of the country, whereas it is not. A number of even some Northerners who had been thinking that it was going to be disadvantageous to them, and now when they are looking at the real terms and the long-term effects of the reforms, they are saying that yes, this is something that is welcome. It is salutary. It will remove rent-seeking. It will remove laziness from the part of political office holders. I think the issue about consultations, public awareness consultations is part of lawmaking, and that is what we want to see the National Assembly, the Senate, and the House. Let them hold public hearings. Let the proponents of this bill come and put forth their case. Let those who are against it come and put forth their own case.
FAN MD kicks over touting and harassment of passengers at airports. The MD, Mrs. Olubumi Kuku, is reported to have launched an operation called Air Clean to clean up airport terminals and eliminate unpatriotic people among officers at the airport. He said it's no longer business as usual. A country's airport is the first point of call for travelers and visitors. It is therefore important that they have a good experience, isn't it, Adesuwa?
It definitely is, particularly when we have a new ministry that is, invested in creative economy, culture, and tourism. We're trying to make Nigeria a business destination, a tourism destination, and the first point of contact, as you said, is the airport, and it is honestly shameful. It is embarrassing. I would say, particularly Murtala Mohammed Airport, you go through and people are trying to shake you down. You're everybody's auntie or mommy, There's always a hand held out, and it seems that instead of having law enforcement agencies, we have rent seekers in uniform who are just there to actually, I would say that sometimes it is sad to see that is how we're representing ourselves on the national stage, and then you come out of the airport and you see disorder and taxis, and then you're being physically harassed in a way that is not becoming for the giant of Africa.
This was pulling no punches
here at all. No, but because when it comes to Nigeria,
yes.
Sometimes I feel that we no longer hold ourselves to the standard that we should, and we've gotten used to these unusual things. But
yes.
I believe more in action than talk, so I would like to see the action that
let's see whether the action will take place. Delhi Independent, let's stay with Delhi Independent. South Africa relaxes visa rules for Nigerian investors and tourists. This was announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa, who said the visa process has been simplified. Charles, let me come to you. Getting visa to South Africa is almost like a camel passing through the needle's eyes, and we are being promised that this will change. Of course, because of this meeting that they had in South Africa.
Absolutely.
I think this is good news to Nigerians.
Absolutely. So it means that President Tinubu's visit to South Africa is already yielding dividends. But of course, the agreement might be there, but let's see how it will be implemented. But yes, indeed, it's a very big change, from passing through the eye of a needle, a camel passing through the eye of a needle, a Nigerian tourist can actually apply for a South African visa without submitting an international passport. I think that's a very huge difference that will make, but we'll keep our fingers crossed and see how this will pan out in the very short run.
That's right, and this is overdue, I think. This is something that should have been done a long time ago. In 2024, as Africans, I think we should be united in more ways than one, and this is good progress, but I think it's long overdue.
Of course, I mean, as the two leaders of Africa, the agreement between the two of them will actually set the tone for, you know, such relationships in future. Okay, let's look at The Guardian. Infrastructure deficit slows CNG adoption amid $450 million investment. Over 100,000 motorists who converted their vehicle to from fuel-powered cars to compressed natural gas (CNG) are now enduring long queues nationwide as they compete at scanty stations to refuel their cars. With only 34 CNG stations available across the country, approximately 870 vehicles are currently tied to one station. Emmanuel, your thoughts on this?
Well, it's remarkable that this is about one of the best initiatives to have come out from this administration, having been prodded by organized labor to move fast on the CNG process. But it's unfortunate this is what happens when you do not articulate your policies very well before you start implementing them. It's unfortunate when you see a situation now that we are now having fuel queues, CNG queues at the filling stations, where motorists will now have to spend hours waiting to fill up their CNG tanks. It's unfortunate, and I think it is the government should pour more energy, pour more resources into building up more CNG stations. Now it's estimated that a station costs about 1 billion naira to set up. So you need to diversify this so that more people can get the benefit of using CNG vehicles. Not only building more stations, the government should also, since this is a long-term policy to bring down the cost of transportation. Government should look at ways at either subsidizing the cost of conversion, because as at now, it's in fact it's almost impossible for an average Nigerian to convert his vehicle.
In terms of allowing conversion kits come in without us having to pay certain taxes on it. But I do agree with you in terms of policy articulation, because the government is spending money taking Basket Mouth and other influencers to India instead of making sure that their infrastructure is prepared to take on their CNG initiative.
Well, the other point, Adesua, is that, I mean, is it right to criticize this? This is a new project, and there are usually fitting problems that go with it. So maybe with time, this will pass.
They should have been well articulated.
That's right.
Yeah, no, I'm asking Adesua.
Okay. Yes, so I think I agree with you in terms of CNG is a good initiative. It's cleaner energy, and it definitely has to do with communication. I think the initiative itself is good. The infrastructure obviously has to catch up, and it's a medium to long-term goal. The communication with the people needs to catch up, because there's a trust deficit in society, and I don't think the government has done enough to bridge that gap and to actually properly communicate the benefits of this program to the people who need it the most.
Yes.
And so, the problem with Nigeria sometimes is not the policy, it's the implementation of that policy.
All right, let's look at the Vanguard. Let's look at the Vanguard quickly. Other papers, tax reform bills, Kuka, CITN, NECA, Pengelson suggest way forward. Obifalana condemn arrest of activist Farotimi. How Nigeria can turn natural resources from curse to blessing. Simon Ekpa must answer for his atrocities but release Nnamdi Kanu, Southeastern residents say. BNC, South Africa relaxes visa rules for Nigerian tourists and business people. Let's look at also the Punch. Tinubu, others review as protests persist in NAS. This is in relation to tax reform. Emefiele Crown is acquired 753 duplex estate with forex kickbacks, according to the EFCC. 80 billion naira fraud caught others former AMCON MDs arrest. Import duty court cases hold grounding of 60 private jets. And then NLC slams Mwifuru as Akwa Ibom joins strike, Kaduna withdraws. Let's go to the international headlines. Daily Graphic, 3 days to general election, zero tolerance for violence. Security Task Force warns. The National Security Task Force, led by the Inspector General of Police in Ghana, Mr. George Akufo Dampare, has said violence is unacceptable in the upcoming election. He said this at a crunch meeting with political parties. This meeting was called to address outstanding security concerns. Let me come to you, Yolanda. Will it not be great to get to a situation where elections are not violent, they are smooth, you cast your vote and you leave the ballot box without having to get police officers to man the polling booths?
Well, Constance, what can I say? Absolutely. That is the African dream, if I can call it that, for us to have, elections that are free of violence. But I like that we've been talking about this continuously for the past couple of days and just reinforcing this message. And I just hope and pray that it goes as expected, because we've had numerous violent outbreaks with elections, and our history tells it all. So hopefully with this, there'll be some democratic credibility with this.
All right, Citizen, criminals can't teach our kids. A staggering number of 25 staff in the departments of basic education have a criminal record.
Indeed.
Many of those criminals are still in front of classes teaching, despite their records reflecting various offenses including rape, murder, assault, theft, robbery, and housebreaking. People have a right to be worried about this, and school bodies are calling on the minister to take immediate action. Yolanda.
Well, systematic failure is all I can say about this. I think, Charles, we were speaking about this yesterday, and you had a few points on this as well.
Actually, I said it's proper to start vetting who would be employed to teach these children. And I mean, these are vulnerable individuals, and then letting out, ex-convicts whose records, exactly. I mean, unleashing them on kids like that, it's absolutely scary. Very, very appalling indeed. So the vetting process has to be very, very vigorous.
All right, the Times newspaper, South Korea in turmoil as politicians rise up against martial law. The country was plunged into crisis 2 nights ago when President Yoon suddenly declared martial law. Troops moved into the National Assembly building in the capital. President Yoon has since lifted the law. I mean, this was a top story last night. The president obviously took a gamble, but he was beat back by the opposition and even his own party, in addition to the overwhelming response from citizens. Emmanuel.
Well, what happened in South Africa yesterday was very, very disturbing. The country has tried to consolidate democracy in the last 40 years. But one must commend the effort of those legislators who came back and beat the security cordon put on by the soldiers and were able to reverse the martial law decree that was promulgated by the president. In fact, one would like to also put Nigerian lawmakers, Nigerian political actors to task. We remember in 1993, when the former military administration annulled the June 12th election, a number of collaborators from the NRC were quick to move and to swim in bed with the military dictators at that time. Just a few of them, like Dr. Doyin Okukpe, who refused, who said that this was wrong. I think this is a charge to Nigerian actors that no matter, people should stand by the law. Whatever happens, if your party loses, or if your party's president does something that is inimical to democracy, you should be able to stand up to the president or whoever and tell him the truth. Side with the people. What the South Korean legislators did yesterday was very commendable, and one must, and again, I must say, I commend their acts to Nigerian lawmakers.
Yolanda, you see, when you followed that story yesterday, it's still uncertain what is going to happen. President Yoon had cited the threat from North Korea. That was why he said he decided to call, a martial law. But of course, the citizens, and the legislators as well, fought against that. But I think that highlights the global issues that are affecting countries at this time, Yolanda?
Thank you for that remark. I just feel like Adesua had something to say. You just felt like you were itching to answer that.
No, because Emmanuel did mention about our legislators, and he pulled it back to the 90s. But even more recently, when there was a push to possibly impeach now Senator Tambuwal, then Speaker of the House, Aminu Tambuwal, we had legislators climbing over the gates in our National Assembly. We had them being tear gassed in the National Assembly complex. We even had our current Chief of Staff, Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, climbed the gate, and the picture went viral. And so we have had different individuals at different times fight for democracy in different ways. Right. Whether or not we agree with those agendas is how those conversations are framed in the public space. Right. But I don't think we should put the South Koreans over us. They've had impeached presidents, they've had coups, they have presidents in jail for corruption. So we should not look at other people and think that they are better than Nigerians. But I do think it's commendable that the legislators there were fighting for democracy, and I hope that our legislators fight for democracy and not just their own personal political gains.
All right. The Sun, exclusive victim Emma's fury against Wallace. She said Wallace thrust his groin at her face, and BBC edited it. This is regarding to the controversy with MasterChef. Well, Greg Wallace is still on the hot seat as more accusations surface. This particular contestant, Emma Phillips Jennings, has come forward with her own story. It's hard to see how Wallace survives all of these allegations. More is coming out concerning his MasterChef program and how the BBC has handled everything. That's all we have for the paper review this morning. Thanks, Emmanuel, for coming.
Well, that's all we have for you today on Daybreak. It's been a lovely time. Goodbye. I'm Adesua Giwal-Sage.
Please do keep it here on Arise News. I'm Charles Zeruka.
And I'm Yolanda Robert. The morning show is next.